This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we're going to start with the Serra prayer for vocations. And since all of you are muted, if you'll just follow along silently with me, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O God, who wills not the death of a sinner, but rather that he be converted and live, grant, we beseech you, through the intercession of Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, Saint Joseph, her spouse, Saint Junipero Serra, and all the saints, an increase of laborers for your church, fellow laborers with Christ, to spend and consume themselves for souls, through the same Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, this is Serra Club Treasurer training for this year. And again, we appreciate everybody joining us. And I hope you got a chance to download the support documents, because there's some detailed stuff that doesn't show up well in a PowerPoint, but it is in the support documents, and we'll be making pretty good constant reference to that. So let's start. I want to talk about how important the treasure is, and I want to tell you a personal story. I became president of my club, the Des Moines Club, Saint Serra Club of Des Moines, and when I was in a pretty young age. I really didn't get much training. I didn't actually even get much notice, but that's the way it goes a lot of times in Serra. So I was feeling kind of a big head being the president at a young age. And the first thing I did is I asked the membership vice president, how many members do we have? And they had this kind of puzzled look on their face and said, you know, you ought to talk to the treasurer to get that number. So, okay. And then I asked somebody else, I said, I heard so-and-so quit. Anybody know why? And several people looked around and they looked at me and they said, you ought to talk to the treasurer, because the treasurer probably knows if they quit and why they quit. And then I turned to an event chairman for the appreciation cookout that we were having. I said, did we make or lose money last year with the $25 a head fee that we charged for that? And they looked at me and they said, you know, you ought to talk to the treasurer to see if that what we did last year in terms of financial performance. And it became kind of clear to me right off the bat that maybe I wasn't the most important person in the club. Maybe it's the treasurer, because that seems to be the only person that has the definitive facts. Your role really is important. You're the go facts. Like I said, you know most about the membership because you maintain the roster and the count when you do the invoicing every 6 months. A lot of times you figure out who's quit and why, because you're contacting them to see why they haven't paid their dues. You're the place people go to try to figure out if there's funds available to do a new project or request. You usually are the only one that has a good financial history of past events that can say, did we make money? Did we lose money? How much did we charge? And how much should we charge? And a role you may not recognize for yourself here, but you are really the informal club archivist, I think. You're the person that sort of keeps the knowledge of what's worked and what hasn't. And that's a really important role. Again, I don't know that it's stated as such, but the reason I think is that many treasurers tend to be in that position for longer than the presidents and the vice presidents are in their position. And you have a knowledge that other officers often don't have. So I think your role is invaluable to Serra. Okay, here's are my slides advancing here? They're not for you. Let's see. Okay, let's try this again. Well, I'm having a technical problem here. I'm going to close out of this and start over on the screen. So give me 1 second. Okay, let's see if this works. Bob, what are you seeing for a slide right now?
It's still the opening, first slide.
What you're looking at actually is the entire slide presentation with the sidebar with all the pages. You need to go into slideshow.
Right. That's not what I want to do here. However, I can run it that way.
Okay, you're now on primary responsibilities.
Okay, I just finished this. This is the slide on the treasurer being the go-to person. I'm sorry about this. I'm not sure why it's not doing this in the slideshow format. Let me go to slideshow one more time and see if this works. Okay.
Press play from start if that's available to you.
Yeah, I want to start from that one slide, but it's not working for me here. Okay, I'm going to have to use the old-fashioned way here. So, primary responsibilities here of the treasurer kind of break into 3 general categories. We're going to talk about each of these, and then these subsections, we're going to have slides on each of these. So, financial, we'll talk about the transactions responsibility, then the reporting responsibility, planning, budgeting, and guidance, and records retention. That's an important one that oftentimes is overlooked. Second big group is the annual tax filing for nonprofit status. And the third is the Serra portal maintenance, maintaining the membership list and the current officers. Okay, let's go to transactions, the financial functions. I think these are pretty straightforward for most of you. You know, probably the most important one is to collect member dues, and that requires issuing due statements and invoices to members on a 6-month basis usually. Second one is to pay approved club expenses, and that would include the US and SI dues that are due twice a year, which is why your invoices are usually twice a year too to your members. And if you are in a region that charges any regional fees, your responsibility is to pay those as well. Third, pretty obvious, receive and timely deposit payments and donations to the bank account for the club. Fourth is to reconcile bank accounts and balance the checkbook monthly, so we know exactly how much money the club has available. Fifth is to manage and report on club savings and investment accounts. Not all clubs have these, but some clubs do. And I think it's important to report on that where you have them. And then finally is to manage the banking relationship. Basically what that means is that the board basically ought to know and approve, probably on an annual basis, the bank that you're using for your accounts. And this is very important. It's important that the treasurer makes sure that there is always more than one authorized signer on the accounts. The reason for that is we've had situations where something happened to a club treasurer and it basically took months for the club to get access to their funds again because nobody else was an authorized signer. So I'd always make sure that there's more than one authorized signer. You know, I'd recommend that the person be the president, but it doesn't have to be. You just have to have somebody else in the club that can access those funds if something happens to the treasurer. And then just keep your board apprised of the banking fees, charges, and interest, and especially when they change. You know, up to this point, it's been mostly banking fees, but hopefully there'll be a little bit more opportunity to gain some interest off of, I don't know if it'll happen to checking accounts yet, but certainly investment and savings accounts. And I just keep the board apprised of interest rate changes that take place. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I'm getting some feedback and I'm muting some of you. This is just kind of for your information. I think you know this, but for your records, I think it's just important to state what the Serra International and US Serra Council dues are. And these are semi-annual dues. So these are the dues every 6 months. For a full member, it's $46. You receive one invoice that covers both the Serra International dues and the US dues if you're a US club. And you can see there how that splits. It's approximately 50-50, not exact. And for spouses and under 35, it's $23. It's half of a full member. And you can see how that splits between Serra International and US. It's, again, pretty much the same split. Serra issues their invoices to clubs in June and December of each year. And they like to get payment to Serra International from the club by July 15th or January 15th. But I know not all clubs do that. I know that the Des Moines Club, for example, it takes us a while to collect our dues. We have 150 members now. Not everybody pays all at once, and we don't want to pay ahead and find out somebody's going to drop. So I think the Des Moines Club actually sends 3 checks. They send one January 15th, and then one February 15th, and then a March 15th to clean it up. So we're always a little bit in arrears on the books, but it's a good way to make sure the club doesn't get trapped paying for someone who's not going to be a member for the coming year. So that's just for your information.
I have a question, Mike.
Yes, go ahead. Who is this?
Jerome Buckmeyer, Columbia River, Serra, which is Vancouver, Washington.
Okay, great.
The question I have is, we had an individual who, well, he left about 12 years ago because of the fact that his job moved him out of the area. He's now retired, and he's looking to come back to this area. He's looking for a house, and if he can find a house, he'll move in and he'll rejoin. Do I then pay the initiation fee? What do I do? I mean, or do I just, is he just like back to the $40? I mean, back to the $46, which immediately, what do I do?
I'm just going to shoot off the cuff here, and I'll ask Bob Campney and Ed Terrell to chime in. But I'd say don't forget about the initiation fee. Just go right back to full member dues. Bob, do you agree with that?
That is right. And Jerome, what your club or Serra Chicago should have done is made that member an inactive member. So all they really should have all the record. So you turn around and add them in. You don't need to have a new member initiation or anything else for that person. You can welcome them, but you don't need to pay those that $11 fee. You don't need to pay it. You don't need to collect it from him. And all they do is just make him active again, but update email and other contact information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ed, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. Makes a lot of sense, Bob. Mike.
So everybody knows Ed Terrell is the treasurer for the U.S. Council. Bob Campney is the treasurer for Serra International. So we've got some people that really do know the answers to your questions. I don't have to wing it on everything here. So, okay, let's go on to the next slide. What's that, Ed? Well, they'll keep me on.
I was gonna say, for right now, that would be Bob Campney 99% of the time. I'm learning. I'm learning from Bob.
There's a transition taking place. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the reporting function. And we're talking primarily here about the reporting at the board meeting. Most clubs have a quarterly board meeting. Some have a monthly board meeting. But these are items that I think are important for the treasurer to report on. First is on income and disbursements since the last meeting, kind of a big picture of what's come in and what's gone out. Second is a report on the financial outcome of club special events. Those would typically be appreciation events for the sisters or the priests or the seminarians or the bishop. And, I think people like to know, and it's important for future planning to know, did you make money? Did you lose money? Did you come out even? And it's not terrible if you lose money. We have traditionally for our sisters appreciation event, we have a lot of sisters come in our club. And I think it's pretty standard for us to lose between $500 and $700. And we've just come to accept that's part of what we do there. And that's part of the use of the dues that we have. So, but I think it's important that people know how you did come out on those things, good, bad, or even. So providing a bank reconciliation, and we have some examples here on pages 2A and 2B. 2A is a typical report that the treasurer for the Serra Club of Des Moines would provide. And he'd usually have a copy of this for everybody on the board, but I don't think that's necessary. I think if you just pass it around, it's fine too. But he talks from it quite a bit. And you can see there that it's pretty simple, and this is, I've always admired our club treasurer. He's retired now, but Bill Cook was a senior partner with Deloitte and Touche. And yet everything he does for the club, he does in pencil. He just writes it out. There's no typing, and he just uses the standard form all the time. So you don't have to be fancy to get the job done, I guess is the point of this one. There's another example here on 2B, and this would be the treasurer's report from the Serra Club of Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. And I like to include them because they're a smaller club. They're about 25 members. And their treasurer is Jane Herrera, who's also the region director for the Northeast region of the US. But this is what she does for the report to the board. It's a little bit more formal, but essentially it's the same thing. So I just want to make clear, it doesn't take a lot to really keep people informed of what's going on there. But I think it's good for them to have that to look at. So one note I've got here that I think is pretty important. I really like to encourage clubs treasurers when they come to the board meeting to have an exact copy of the most recent bank statement that shows the balance that the bank has to the board. And I'll tell you why that is. Technically, clubs are supposed to do an annual audit. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know any club that does. You know, people didn't volunteer to be a Serran to spend their Saturday morning one day a year going through checkbook registers and things like that. And I totally understand that. But I do think it's important that the officers, particularly the president, know what the bank is saying the club has, even if there's been changes since then. That's what the reconciliation is for. And the reason is this. We had a situation about 8 years ago, maybe 10 by now, but where a club treasurer kept reporting that there was about $5,000 in the bank account. And something happened to the treasurer, and somebody else had to jump in, and they found out it wasn't 5,000, it was 500. And actually there had been some personal use of the funds in the club's account, but he'd been able to sort of cover that for a while. I'm happy to tell you that all the money was recovered. So the Serra Club didn't lose. But I think it's this providing a bank statement is a good way to replace an audit. And it isn't perfect, but it lets people know. Somebody says there's $5,000 in the account, and you see a bank statement that says there's $4,500. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd think that might be a timing difference or reconciliation. But if somebody says there's $5,000 in the account and the bank statement says 500, it's time for somebody on the board to ask questions there, and that's the proper role for the board. And I think it's an effective replacement for an audit. So please consider that practice if you would. It's not a big deal. I think you could just bring one, pass it around, or if you want to, just even give the president a copy. Or what you might do is if you have one of these bank accounts where you can have duplicate reporting, you could even just have the bank statement sent also to some officer you designate on the board. So, but I think it's a really good practice. And then finally, under reporting, deal with donations that are received here. The most important thing here is that people that donate more than $250 or more will require a letter from the club. And I got a sample here on page 2C. This again is from the Des Moines Club, and it's real simple. In fact, it says more than you have to say, but the key words are the last sentence there. The Serra Club of Des Moines did not provide you with any goods or services in whole or in part for this contribution. And that's important to get out so that the donors don't have problems when they come to their personal tax year end and claim their donation as a charitable deduction. Any questions on that? Okay, let's go on to the next slide here. We're going to talk about planning, budgeting, guidance. You know, in terms of budgeting, I just want to tell you that my experience is that a lot of clubs do not do an annual budget. And what they do is they use the prior year as kind of a de facto budget. You know, they just keep a comparison of how we're doing this year versus last year and how much that cost and how much it brought in. So in that case, it's just a matter of sort of tracking. But some clubs do annual budgeting, and if that's the case, they're going to be relying on you as the treasurer to help put that budget together. So just be aware that that's a role you may have in one of those two different facets. And then treasurer often assists in the financial planning for special events. That would be like clergy appreciation, meal events. And that usually is important for the next event coming up so that they can analyze whether the pricing on the prior one was enough to cover or whether they have to make adjustments in the expenses, like go with a less expensive caterer or whatever it might be. But that's an important function that the treasurer can provide. And oftentimes it's only the treasurer that can provide it, since nobody keeps good records of what happened a year ago. And finally, if your club ever hosts a regional convention, we have we're having more and more of those right now. It's a big deal for a club. Those financial records are really important if the club hosts it again in coming years, because usually those conventions are hosted in the central region, they're hosted every 8 or 10 years by some of the larger clubs. But that's an important area for financial planning that the treasurer can help on. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Records retention. Now, this is one that I don't think has been emphasized enough in Serra. In fact, I don't think we've ever really talked about it until last year's training session. But we had a group of Bob Campney was on it at the time. Bill Cook, our treasurer here in Des Moines. We had Jane Herrera as a representative for a smaller club. And we also had the St. Petersburg treasurer, who's since deceased, but that group kind of came up with a recommendation for records retention. And this typically is going to fall to the treasurer because they're going to have access to most of these. So the first one is just a fiscal year end. That would be the end of whatever your fiscal year is. It doesn't have to be the tax year. For a lot of clubs, it's July 1st to June 30th, because that's the period that their officers are appointed for. It could be a calendar year, whatever it is. Doesn't have to correspond to your tax, but it's just important, I think, to have a income and disbursements report. Bank records, I would keep your monthly bank statements and canceled checks, although a lot of banks don't give those anymore, but they give access to them for 5 years. Membership records, which I think would probably correspond mostly to the invoices that you get from Serra International every 6 months. And finally, your tax filings. It's a great idea to keep those for 5 years, but 5 years should do it. So 5 years is what we recommend. And then the only exception to that would be to retain records for special events like a regional convention. Those involve a lot of cash, a lot of expenses, and because they're held every 7 or 8 years typically by a club, and not all clubs do this, but if you are a club that does host regional conventions occasionally, it's a great idea to retain those records really until the next time that your club is going to have to host the regional convention, because they're really invaluable for starting the planning process again. Okay, let's talk about the tools. And I want to recommend here that the best rule is to keep it simple. And I really think that most club treasurers can do an adequate job of everything they do, almost with a checkbook register, much like Bill Cook did in that page 2A, just a real simple sheet. I think that a lot of clubs use Excel spreadsheets, and some clubs use Quicken and QuickBooks. I think that's a little overkill, but that's up to the treasurer. The one thing we really recommend caution on is using any proprietary accounting software. And the reason for that is that oftentimes the treasurer is familiar with something and maybe they've had access to it in their job and they're used to using it, or they just depend their function onto it. But the problem is when it comes time to transfer to the next treasurer, it's not likely to go well at all. And somebody's going to have to really start over from scratch, since it is proprietary accounting software and nobody wants to buy software to do this function. So keep it simple. I think that's the main thing to take from this slide. And finally, here are some tips. Wait till it shows up for you. There you go. These are just some ideas that the group came up with, but one is to encourage members to pay annually rather than every 6 months. It saves you and them the hassle of having to write a check. And also when you do it, when you send your invoices, it really helps to have some information about what the dues have accomplished. And so on page 4A, You see here an example. Again, I borrowed from my own club, the St. Serra Club of Des Moines. And you can see that they really do encourage members to pay. And actually, at this point, I understand that about 60% of the members pay for the whole year. And I do that. I do it just because I like to pay with the January invoice, and I just know it's done for the year, and I don't have to worry about it there. And also, when they do that, they include a special request for donations to things that the club does that are above and beyond the dues. So, for example, our club started giving a birthday gift of $50 to each seminarian, and we fund that out of donations that happen on top of the dues. So we adjust that year to year, but I think it's actually up to $75 now. People have been really generous. It's amazing what people will donate to if they know specifically where it's going to go. And seminarians are really in the heart of a lot of Serrans. So that's it. And then also, if you look at the second half of the bottom half of that page, Bill would list out the 2020 highlights of what we did for priests, the sisters, the seminarians, the bishop, and how many members we added, how big the club is, that we've had good attendance, and some of the leadership roles that are being filled by club members. So that's just an example, I think. Third bullet here, encourage your club invitations to special events to include donations option. And that's on page 4B, I think. Yep. And again, another example from Des Moines. This is the Priest Appreciation Picnic. We have one annually, and the top part is just the information about it. But the bottom part, which is to be returned, if you look down there, I've circled, we always have this line on every kind of appreciation event. I am unable to attend, but have enclosed a donation in the amount of, and so it's intended to cover the cost for the priests who come free, of course. And the same would be true for the Sisters Appreciation event and seminarians and the Bishop's event. So it's just, that's basically between the donations requested at the time the invoice goes out for special things like birthday cards and the special appreciation events, that pretty much funds quite a bit of the Serra activities for the Des Moines Club. So I would encourage you to use it on a regular basis. The fourth bullet point here is encourage members to consider a bequest in their will towards your club. You sort of have to compete there. I think Serra International and the U.S. Council and the Serra Foundation also request that. So, but it doesn't hurt to request it. It gets people thinking about it. And then this last point, again, is a really important one. You're hearing my wife's phone ring in the background, and she's not here, so you're going to have to listen for a while. Keep a key information backup notebook. Our St. Petersburg treasurer, who actually is deceased at this point, said that he took over the treasurer's function when their treasurer passed away, and he had no information. He said he had to just go from scratch and find out even what bank they were using. He didn't have passwords. He didn't have any of the IRS websites that were being used. And so what he did is he put together a key information backup notebook. And I think he gives that to the president, or he gave it to the president. And it's a great thing to have in the event that something does happen to the treasurer there. So I'm going to. Okay, get rid of that background noise. Let's see here. Now, so those are just tips for you to keep in mind there. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk about the annual tax filing for nonprofit status. And I'm going to handle this slide, and then I'm going to sort of turn it over to Bob Campney to talk about with Ed Terrell's help. But I want to talk about why maintaining the nonprofit status is important. There are three reasons. Probably the most important reason is that donors who make a contribution to your club expect to take a charitable contribution on their own personal tax returns. They can't do that if it's a nonprofit or if it's not a nonprofit. So it's really important to maintain the nonprofit status. Now, people will do that, and if they do, it's probably unlikely that the IRS is going to pick up on that in an audit of the person. But where it has been a real barrier has some people make charitable contributions to the club through a personal foundation or a trust. And a lot of those foundations now have a procedure where they can check with the IRS to see if the donee is actually a nonprofit. And if they don't find you on that list, they'll go back to the donor and say, we can't make that contribution because they're not listed as a nonprofit. So you want to be listed as a nonprofit with the IRS. That you want to keep that status to keep charitable contributions, your donations coming in, and to keep those charitable contributions deductible. Second one is just theoretical. I don't think this is a real possibility, but the reality is that if a club does not have a nonprofit status, it's very possible that the IRS, it's not very possible, it's not very likely, let me say that. It's not likely, but it's possible for the IRS to come in and say, okay, you were not a nonprofit, and so any excess of income over expenses is required to be prorated, distributed to the members of the club, and they have to report it as income on their personal return. Now, like I said, I don't think there's hardly any chance of that happening, but theoretically it's possible. It's just another reason why you want to maintain your nonprofit status. And finally, if you're using the Serra International group exemption, and most clubs do, it also protects Serra International's nonprofit exemption. So 3 good reasons, I think, for working hard to maintain that nonprofit status by doing the annual tax filing. Next slide, I'm going to turn this over to, let's see here. I'm going to turn this over to Bob Campney. I thought I inserted a slide here. Well, here, I'm going to, let me skip ahead. I'm going to turn over to Bob Campney, and this slide is not in your support documents. I just put it in the presentation this morning based on an email that Bob sent to all the club treasurers in the US. So let's start with this, and I'll go back to the slide before that. Bob, do you want to just mention what you said in your email?
Yeah, essentially I send this email out certainly this time of the year, spring, summer, late summer, so that reminding people to file that 990. We don't want to fall behind, and what you covered is you lose your tax exemption if you don't. So this email I sent out had a little different start. Basically, my quick summary was, if you will, so don't forget to file your 990 if you're talking about 990 topics. There are 61 clubs who had been reinstated March this year, who were errantly changed by the IRS, and I've been in touch with them. The point is, there's hope, and in that email I cover it. The short of that is, I finally, after 4 months of chasing, have a contact at the high level in the management of the IRS, and he has finally made contact with me after now 2.5 years, the last time we spoke. So he's going to attack this issue. I have no doubt he will. It might take time, but there is hope. Hopefully we'll resolve that.
That issue affects the income threshold or the revenue threshold.
It has multiple effects, but the primary is when you file a 990, where you see it the most is you file your 990N. And for those 61 clubs, very likely, I have found that not all of them, I have no idea why not, they're not the same, but the revenue threshold for filing a 990N, the simplest method, is changed from 50,000 down to 5,000. And we had them where we wanted them, and the IRS changed them. So I won't get into the details, but my point is there's hope. We have made contact, and it's all within the last 7 or 8 days. Now there is also, in the last 10 days now, a new email that came out. It's just like your investment account or your bank. They might have a secondary or third authentication process. And so the IRS is going to do that, use that now on the password for entry into filing a 990N. I have personally not gone in there. I've been busy, but I clearly can. But I've talked in the last few days with several club members, and they've gone in. It's a very simple change. So I encourage you to go in and do it. And when you're filing, don't be concerned. And you'll see my email and phone number on a later slide. Yell at me and we'll work you through it. I've been doing that probably a dozen calls here in the last 2 or 3 days. just because when I nudged with this email, it happens like that. There are sites waiting or wanting that. Now, so a third item is, I've had a couple of people call me and say, I've got the 990 all filled out, the 990N, but now they want $40. What's with that? So the point is, they, instead of getting into the site that I have in the guidance, which we'll cover in a moment, they went into another site on your email query, and there are sites out there, they're legitimate probably, but they want you to pay a fee for them doing the work. You give them the information, and finally, honestly, it's only 4 or 5 questions. It's real easy to do right on the IRS site. And honestly, you don't want to give them your, in my mind, you don't want to give them your credit card. So just be aware, there are sites. If you use that guide, you'll not have an issue.
Okay, let's go back to the slide I had up before. This is just maintaining nonprofit status. Bob?
Yeah, to maintain, you annually file that IRS Form 990. There are 3 varieties of it, but 95%, well, I'll cover that again in another slide. Filing must be done by the 15th day of the 5th month, following your tax year end, your fiscal year end. Now that may vary. Some clubs say, hey, I want my record keeping to be December 31, but their tax year end might be May or March or June. So you've got to be cognizant, aware that your tax filing is different than your reporting to your board. Many clubs, most clubs say, I want them to be the same. And there's another third theory that clubs use many times. They, when they exchange officers to a new president, et cetera, it's many times done in the late spring, early summer, so May, June, July. So point is, you've got to know what your tax year end, your fiscal year end is for tax purposes. Late filing penalties. IRS.
Bob, can I interject there? If they don't know it, they can call you to find out, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I got a call this morning. Guy says, hey, I'm a March 31 year end. Am I too late to file? Point is, he was a May 31. He didn't know it. He's been filing a 990N for 5 or 6 years. So the point is, you don't have to know everything. God aware, if you will. Contact me, I'll get you the facts. And he found out he's still within his filing period. Everything's good. He's filing, he's on his way. So I've had a lot of times people have called, and within 3 or 4 minutes, we find out that the issue is not an issue. Late filing penalties, when I got involved at some like 3 or 4 years ago, the IRS there was a lot of clubs not filing and late filing or failure to file at all. There was penalties out there everywhere. Now, I fought and won on several. I worked with the club, and then several I've still got out there hanging. But the point is, most of them were just wiped out by the IRS. I will tell you, I have no doubt when they get their feet back under them on their systems and whatever else, I'm not counting on that 87,000 new IRS reps, auditors, to help this problem, but they have their systems to fix, and they will one day again charge penalties, late filing fees. They can charge up to $25 a day per regs. I don't expect that to happen, but it will happen at one day. So keep filing.
Okay, let's go to the 990 update on clubs that lost their status and are trying to get it renewed.
And there's really 2 topics when we got into this 990 issue. One is the reinstatement. We had 80 clubs at the time that had actually turned to 90 clubs that had lost their exemption due to not filing their tax return. They're there at 990. 63 of those clubs have been filed, and a number of others have been resolved in another fashion. We have 19 yet to pursue. Honestly, I would love to have the time to go out there and chase those, but all of those clubs have declined at this point, or not been able to respond, make contact with. So anyway, there'll be a day. I'll keep chasing that, but that's the case. And it goes back to an earlier slide where if your club is not tax exempt, then in theory, it's the income, if any, is taxable. So we've got 19 clubs yet to pursue. There is a new issue, that's that 61 clubs IRS improperly changed 60 clubs who had been reinstated. And I mentioned, I'm repeating that $5,000 versus $50,000 threshold. There was a second issue, reclassification, and that was mostly successful. That issue was really all the clubs that were under there. I'm getting into too much stuff here, but all the clubs that were under the Serra International Group Exemption, they were not able to file a 990N. So we changed that, and I would say there's only a handful of there's some exceptions yet. But what that means is people, and I have had many Serrans call me and say, Bob, I've been filing that big 990EZ for years, and now they can file that 990N quickly. So that issue is mostly successful.
Okay. You want to just talk about your guidance document here?
Yeah, there's a guidance in your, and on the second point there, it's on pages 5A and D of the exhibit that he's got there. You've got my email in there, but I'm covering yet again here. A club can file a 990N if your annual revenue is under 50,000. Now, as I mentioned, I got 61 clubs just changed there. So, but we're working it, and there is hope. That's the hope part.
Okay, good. Well, I think this is our last slide on this, Bob. Do you want to just cruise through these?
A club which fails to file the correct IRS Form 990 for 3 consecutive years automatically loses its nonprofit status. I suppose, Mike, what we could do is relook at some of these points and maybe consolidate some of them. We're repeating a little bit, but there is two of those 61. Actually, now it's 63 or 4 clubs that I've reinstated. I've done 2 more here this month. There is a reinstatement. It's called an IRS Form 1023. I file it. I get involved with the club. There's a fee. We charge the club of $275. It's failure to file for 3 consecutive years, essentially. And I'll coordinate that. All the contact is there.
Thank you, Bob. We're going to take a break here and ask for questions because I know this is a complicated subject that a lot of treasurers are interested in. So remember to unmute yourself so that you can make a comment or ask a question of Bob or Ed. Anybody have anything?
Bob, my name is Peggy from the Tri-Cities, Washington.
Yes.
I'm just curious. So if our club only, the income was under 50,000, I'm confused. I heard 5,000.
Okay. I don't know your club offhand. If you want, shoot me an email and I'll give you a literal response to that.
Okay.
But in theory, when you go to file, you may, we have most all the clubs set to be, when they go in with the question that the IRS asks in the filing is your revenue usually under $50,000? And you say yes, typically.
Okay.
And right now, those clubs, many of those clubs, what we just discussed, that question is not 50, it's 5,000. And that's where you run into issues. And if you do, anybody listening here, if you run into that, just call me. That's what my email was saying that I sent out Saturday. Call me, I can help you get through that.
Peggy, I might add too that it's important to know that the question involves the revenues the club receives, not the income.
Not the net income. It's revenues, whether it's dues revenue or if you ran a dinner and charged people $20 to attend, all those add up to the gross revenues.
Right.
Right.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Mike, I had a question going back a little bit to the thank you letter for the donations.
Yes.
Is it prudent for the clubs to say that all contributions are tax deductible in that cover letter?
I don't think that's adequate from an IRS point of view. See, I think some clubs get confused about whether dues are are tax deductible, and they're not. And like a payment for a dinner, like an appreciation event, for yourself, if you pay $25 per year, which is the per head cost for yourself, that's not a donation. It's not deductible. But if you pay an additional $25 to cover the cost of a priest or something, it is.
Mhm.
So I think that terminology might be a little too broad, and I would really recommend that and most people have tax advisors that'll give them good advice on that. But I would say that it has to be a true donation where there's no benefit received.
Mike, let me comment, because you might be asking two questions, or quite another question, but to be clear here, their dues are not tax deductible. If you had a dinner for seminarians or something and you charged your members $20 to attend because of the catering, whatever, that $20 is also not deductible from a personal's return because they're receiving a benefit, the meal. But a contribution or a donation typically would be, if I want to give $100 to support some seminarian somewhere, yes. So there's a definition of, so not everything is, and I'm not sure if I remember your question, but it also has to do with now that a club may not be tax exempt, when you write that letter and send it out that we are a 501c3, it gives the impression that everything is tax deductible as far as a deduction, a donation is concerned. And I'm not sure if that answered your question, but you can get into some technical facets.
Yep,
Yeah.
that answers it. I was just leery about saying that all contributions are tax deductible as a 501c.
And a contribution, I will tell you, the clubs that are not tax exempt, it's technically not deductible. So you're getting off into some technical parts, but a contribution, like a donation, is deductible.
Good question, Ralph.
I think I'll have them take that out and just say no services were provided.
Yep, I think that's the key.
Good point.
And your club has its nonprofit status intact, right?
That's all of our clubs do, yes.
Great.
At the moment, anyway. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? This is an important topic. I don't want to short it.
Monica.
Okay, can you hear me?
You're light.
Okay, so I know from when we do our banquet here, so if we charge $20 to the member, but the meal only costs us $13, they can actually get a tax receipt for $7.
That is accurate. Go ahead. If you have further question.
So, and then my other question is back on slide 9. How do other clubs do invoices if they're not using a software program?
Just an email. Just
Wow.
an email, Monica.
Generally, Monica, email. Most clubs are just, email is an incredible tool if done properly, and it's a great way to contact.
No, I know that, but what kind of a form are they using?
Just what you saw there. If you look at that sample,
It's just an email worded, and however you want to strike one. But I think there is a sample in there, Monica.
Okay.
look at page 4A, Monica, because I think that was actually sent out by email.
Okay.
And Mike, Monica's with Kearney, a new club, Monica, as you got questions, you come at me.
Okay.
Good. Now I've got to remember where I was here. Okay, we're going to press on. This is a new topic we haven't touched on before, but it's just an encouragement for clubs to see if they can qualify in their state for a sales tax exemption. Sales taxes are getting to be a pretty big number at this point, and it's a savings to the club if they can get an exemption from the state. But it is a state-to-state deal, so we can't give you a pure, simple answer here. I think that a large number of clubs have applied successfully in their state for a sales tax exemption. And I was told it isn't a number. Sometimes you have to actually give a certificate to your major suppliers that they have on file so that they can be sure that you are sales tax exempt. And you want to check your own state. We had a cautionary note from Ron Helms, who's in the Council Bluffs, Iowa Club. That's the state I'm in. He said they ran into some problems when they filed for their state tax exemption. The government or the state just came back with a use tax, which I'm not smart enough to know all those things, what they mean, but and I'm not sure that I don't think that would be true in most states. Ed Terrell he has been the treasurer for his club down in Houston, Texas. And Ed, you guys have successfully filed for a sales tax exemption. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, you've got to go through the state for your state sales tax exemption. So that's going to be different in every state, obviously. And if there's anybody on the call from Texas, I can share with you the process I went through to do that. Pretty straightforward, but it's going to be state specific, I think, Mike.
Yep, it is.
And Mike,
the final, yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Let me just cover real quickly. This is an important slide for people who maybe has a fair amount of revenue coming through, such as they have banquets or that sort of thing. When you've got a small club and you don't have much revenue coming in, there's not a lot of benefit for this. There's really not a lot of downside to get a tax exemption. In the state of Nebraska, it's easy to get it. I will tell you, Office Depot and the Marriott Hotel, I just give them a form and we have no charge for any of the meals or sales tax on if we use audio-visual equipment or anything like that. So it becomes a really nice tool where you're saving several $1,000s if you're running $20,000 or $30,000 on a regional convention. So it can be really a great tool. It's not necessarily something that all clubs necessarily need to spend time on. And again, it's a treasurer's question. I'm sure Ed or I mean, we can't necessarily research the specific state, but we can answer questions in that regard.
Great. I had one last note here. When we talked about this, Ann wrote, who's the president-elect of Serra, she's with the Lafayette, Indiana Club, and she noted that with the permission of her diocese, they're able to use the diocesan sales tax exemption status for a lot of their major purchases, which I thought was pretty creative. I'm not sure all dioceses would give you that permission, but it's just something to keep in mind. So, any questions?
Mike, a comment on that. That's typical in Nebraska. That would be a stretch under the tax license they have. It would be a stretch, which is why we didn't use our diocese. We went out and got our own.
Okay, good comment. Any other questions on that? Okay, let's move on here. We're almost done. This is not a tax question, but it's just something to be aware of. Sometimes on, I think it's on the tax form, Bob, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it'll ask what the nature of the organization is, and it's association versus corporation typically. This has probably already been decided for your club if you've been going for a while, but basically we like to encourage you to use the association. There are some states, I've listed there the ones that I know, New York, Ohio, Florida, that require you to file as a corporation. And once you are a corporation, there's usually an annual or a biannual, meaning every other year, requirement to file a report with the Secretary of State, along with a really minimal fee. It isn't much, and it's easy to do. It just is putting in the address and the list of officers and their address. And the trouble is, if you don't do it, you get put in, you get taken off of in good standing status. And I don't know who looks at that list or who doesn't, but basically everybody likes to be in good standing, so you want to do it. And the trouble is, it's an easy thing to overlook when you're in an all-volunteer organization like we are, because you have turnover. So if the treasurer turns over, usually it's being mailed to the treasurer's address or the president's address. When those people change, if they fail to forward it to the new officer taking their position, nobody in the club knows about the new requirement to do the annual report coming up. So you just want to, if you can avoid being a corporation, you want to be an association. That's preferable there. Any questions on that? Okay, let's jump down to the next slide.
You locked up there, Mike.
Mike, are you there? It looks to me like Mike might have frozen up.
Yep.
Let's see what he does here. We're close to done. The next one does talk about, and if he comes back in here, next one talks about liability insurance. So it kind of relates to corporation versus association. Liability insurance is available. When your dues essentially pay for it, there's an application form at the site, and it tells you on that in the examples, I think, that he sends out samples, but it's available to you. Essentially, let's just say our club, we might have a small bar if we're having seminarians and priests in, rather than have the hotel pay all of that. But the point is, there's alcohol involved, and you want to make sure there's liability insurance. So Mike, looks like Mike's back in. He's making the change here.
Oh yeah, okay, here we go.
There you go.
I had a connection lost for some reason with my network,
Mike,
so I'm back.
Yeah, Mike,
I'm back.
we were just starting to talk about the liability, so go ahead.
Right. So it isn't so much to cover your club as it is to cover the venues where you hold your events.
Right.
So if you use like a church facility to hold an appreciation event, a lot of times the church has traditionally asked for some kind of insurance coverage, and that's what this, you can get this at no cost through Serra International. And we're finding that at least in our diocese now, all the churches have been told they also need to have the diocese itself listed as an additional insured. And I think there's a new space on the form to do that. But anyway, this is, it's for one event only, but you can do it for as many events as you want. It's just specific to one event. And there is the link at the bottom. And I don't think you have that link in your, I don't think this is the same link that you have in your document there that you downloaded, because we found out that didn't work. Somebody tried it right after my presentation and it didn't work. So the, I think the long and the short is that use this, and if you have an issue, if you don't have an opportunity to copy this down right here, you can go to the serraus.org website and go under Club Resources, and there's a drop-down menu, and that includes a request for liability insurance, and that'll take you right to that form too. Okay, sorry about that disruption in the connection here, but we'll keep going on in the interest of time. Any questions about that? Ralph, question?
I'm sorry, I was just,
That's okay. Okay, let's go on here. Portal maintenance. This is another important function. Usually this is shared between the treasurer and the president, but I do want to let you know there's a great tutorial, and I've got the site to it there. It's one of the on the Serra YouTube channel. It really is a pretty good job of explaining how to do portal maintenance. And of course, the treasurer is typically the one that does the membership because that's in preparation for the invoice that you'll get and you'll be paying to Serra International. You make changes there. But also an important thing in that portal is to list the officers. And that it can be done by the treasurer or it can be done by the president. And actually, any club officer who is listed in the portal as a club officer can make changes to the club membership and officer list. But you've got to be listed in there, and you've got to have a working email address so you can sign into the portal. So, and the changes are pretty easy. I'm not going to go through them here, but basically when you sign on, you get your profile page, and at the top there's a bar across. You want to click on My Club, and then if you have authority, click on the Administer Roster button that's down the left. If that isn't highlighted, you don't have authority to make changes to it. And then you just go to the new member. You can click and add new member for if there's a new member, that's at the top. Or if you're editing a current member, you scroll down in the list to find the member and click edit, and you can make all the changes to that member's field you want. The only thing I want to caution you is when you get all done, after you make the changes, don't forget to go to the bottom of the page and click the button Save, because if you don't do that, it won't be recorded in the permanent database. And if you got any questions, as usual, the Chicago office has been really good about helping clubs make changes in the portal if they're having problems at all. So just give the Chicago office a call. Okay, collections discussions. I got three kind of approaches here to share with you. The one is from the Des Moines Club. That's on the top of page 7A. And this is just something that Bill Cook wrote up when he was treasurer, and it gives you his explanation of how he does it. He typically sends out the invoices by email, and there's usually a few people that we have to send a hard copy to because they don't have email, but in our club, 90% of the people do have email, and he'll do some follow-ups. One step he takes in between calling, sending the emails and calling if he hasn't received the dues is that if he knows that somebody who's late on the dues has a close friend in the club, he'll ask the close friend to call and see if they got the email and encourage them to pay there. And finally, if he doesn't get any action there, he does a phone call follow-up. And you can see what he does. And then down below is the approach that Jane Herrera takes in her smaller club, the Lehigh Valley Club of Pennsylvania. And they have a very interesting approach that I just wanted to share with you. You can see there at the bottom of the page, the last big paragraph. In January 2020, we began a pay-as-you-are-able dues collection with a suggested $80 full member rate and $40 for spouses and those under 35. This has been a great success. 2 members give less than the suggested rate, and many members give more than the suggested rate. We have received several $100s over the suggested rate each time this has been tried. So a little bit different approach to dues, but I've been impressed at the success they've had with it there. Is there anybody else? And then there's a page where she lists, she has her invoice, and for, who was that? Was it Monica?
Yes.
Who was asking the question about invoices? That's an official invoice that I think Jane sends hers out by hard copy. She said you can do that because she's a smaller club, but in a big club, that's a big deal, and it's a big cost for mailing, so email's the better approach there. And then she sends an attending letter that just talks about what the club's accomplishing with the dues. Again, going back to that idea, helping to sell what the dues are good for. Any questions or comments, or anybody want to add particular things they've done that have been successful there? Remember, you have to unmute yourself. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so in the interest of time, I'll plow ahead, but chime in here. I can go back. We have 3 other document forms that are attached here just for your information. One is the new member application form. I still think there's a lot of work to be done to make this better, but it is improving. There's a club transfer form, and that's for when members transfer from one club to another. That lets them maintain all their seniority and status in Serra. And finally, the last pages here are a club treasurer position description. This is something that Bob and the group, the little team that we put together on this created. And basically, it's very similar to what you've heard in this presentation distilled down into just a few pages. So That's on page 7F and 7G. So take a look at that, but I think it's a sort of a good summary of what we've gone over here today. Okay, this slide, I kind of created a treasurer's prayer because I think treasurers need prayers, and they do a great job. It's really important. So I don't think I'll read it to everybody here. You should have a copy, but I think it's a good way to reflect on how important you are to God's work in these Serra clubs. So finally, I just want to thank everybody here for being a treasurer. I know there's a lot of mundane things that treasurers have to do, nitty gritty, dot the I's and cross the T's, make sure it's all right. They're all invaluable to your club surviving and thriving. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for being a Serran, and thanks for all the work you do to promote vocations. And thank you for attending today. I will stay on for a few minutes here if there are questions that people have. But I really appreciate this, and appreciate all the interest of the people that came. Just to let you know, we had 21 people who are not presenters today. We had 37 who are not presenters on Thursday, so we've covered a total of about 58 of the clubs. Hopefully those are all treasurers or presidents. Both were invited, but we've had a pretty good coverage with this, and I think we'll keep up this treasurer training in the future here. Any questions or comments from anybody?
Mike, this is Ed.
Yes.
And Bob, thank you for taking us through this. I'm not sure why I have my camera on, but I don't appear in my box. So I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong, but I just wanted you to know that.
Okay, fair enough. Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's end with a prayer, and I think I'll end with the Our Father here. Just follow along silently in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all.